Joshua tree. This single tree could be hundreds, even thousands of years old. And that's because what you see is only part of the story. Underground, there's a massive network of roots going down to water, pulling that water out of the ground and storing it in the tree, keeping the tree alive, resilient to the desert wasteland. In the world today, 1 in 8 Christians are discriminated against, oppressed, even attacked, just because they follow Jesus. They are desperate voices crying out in a dry land.
When I became a Christian, my village turned against me. I no longer belong.
In China, the government installed facial recognition cameras in our sanctuary. That camera can gather the private data of our church members. They will intimidate them to prevent them from going to church.
Suna kone churches, suna ibe kayan mutane, suna kashe mutane. That means ana kashe Krista a wannan lokaci. So ina gani domin Kristanci ni nake gani.
We know from this year's World Watch List that 340 million Christians live in places around the world where they are discriminated against or persecuted because of their faith in Jesus. That number is hard to imagine, hard to get your mind around, but we know that God is faithful. In the book of Isaiah, God tells his people, I will make new ways in the wilderness and rivers in the desert.
In midst of persecution, churches are growing more. Through the persecution, God is making the church grow.
When you read the 2021 World Watch List and let it touch your heart, when you commit to pray for your brothers and sisters who are persecuted around the world for their faith, you're helping God make rivers in the desert and helping his children to stand strong for him.
The prayer is the core. When you don't know anything, just pray. When you don't understand anything, pray. You will understand.
Open Doors has been called into this work to strengthen God's people in the desert and to help them overcome the odds. Will you join us?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President and CEO Open Doors, David Curry.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Since its inception 231 years ago, the Office of the Secretary of State has played a pivotal role in the American government, as you all know. Secretary Blinken, our 71st Secretary of State, has served in the American government for nearly 30 years, working across 3 different presidential administrations. His role includes overseeing the advancement of international religious freedom in the U.S. foreign policy. In his remarks just 2 months ago on the release of the 23rd International Religious Freedom Report, Secretary Blinken acknowledged the tremendous challenges that we face ahead. From the plight of people of faith in Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Burma, and to the genocides faced by the Uyghur Muslims in China. The Secretary has noted that the majority of the world's people live in countries with high restrictions on religious freedom. The Secretary also reiterated the commitment of the Biden-Harris administration to maintaining America's long-standing leadership on this important issue, and we can take encouragement from that, and that they are committed to protecting and defending religious freedom around the world. Today, we are grateful to the Secretary of State for standing by this commitment, and I believe I could say with confidence that every one of us, regardless of our faith, are praying for Secretary Blinken that he will be successful as he works to advance the fundamental right around the world of religious liberty. Secretary Blinken.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to join the inaugural International Religious Freedom Summit to reiterate the Biden administration's commitment to promote and defend religious freedom around the world for everyone. Freedom of religion or belief is a human right. It goes to the heart of what it means to be human, to think freely, follow our conscience, change our beliefs if our hearts and minds lead us to do so, and express our beliefs in public and in private. This freedom is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's also part of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Freedom of religion or belief, like every human right, is universal. All individuals everywhere are entitled to it, no matter where they live, or what they believe, or don't believe. And religious freedom is co-equal with other human rights. And human rights are indivisible. For example, a person's right to speak, assemble, or participate in the political life of their country are all connected to freedom of religion or belief. When that freedom is jeopardized, the others are too. The United States is committed to defending and advancing human rights, and religious freedom is a vital component of our diplomacy. Every day, our team in the Office of International Religious Freedom at the State Department in Washington, along with American diplomats around the world, work with local religious communities and civil society advocates to track threats to religious freedom, coordinate responses, and lift up solutions. In recent years, the United States has expanded partnerships with like-minded governments to press others to address the systemic and structural challenges that undermine religious freedom. And we've seen some promising responses, including transformational change in Sudan and Uzbekistan, which has long been designated by our government as countries of particular concern for their severe abuses, and are now on a much better path toward protecting the rights of their citizens. We're looking forward to appointing an ambassador at large for international religious freedom in the coming weeks. We'll continue to work closely with civil society organizations, including many of you, to combat all forms of religiously motivated hatred, violence, and discrimination around the world. As those on the front lines, civil society members are often the first to report atrocities, abuses, persecution, and the first to offer support to those in desperate need of it. Whether by shining a spotlight on the worst offenders of religious freedom, reuniting those separated from their families, providing shelter and resettlement to those forced from their homes, facilitating the release of wrongfully detained individuals, or helping survivors to speak out against their abusers, we're often able to make a difference together. And we'll keep going. Our country was founded in part on the conviction that everyone should be free to believe what they choose. With the support of everyone gathered at this summit, we will maintain America's long-standing leadership on religious freedom. Thanks for listening.
China Aid is an international nonprofit Christian human rights organization committed to promoting religious freedom and the rule of law in China. China Aid's mission focuses on exposing persecution and abuses from the Chinese Communist Party, encouraging the persecuted, and equipping Christians and church leaders across China to defend their faith and freedom. China Aid founder and president Bob Fu was one of the student leaders in Tiananmen Square.
In the history of communist China, there has never been anything like this.
He was arrested and imprisoned in China alongside his wife for illegal evangelism. Bob founded China Aid upon coming to America and is now one of the leading voices in the world for persecuted faith communities in China.
Thank you for your love and care over the years. Let's continue to walk with the persecuted faithful. Amen.
Welcome back, David Curry.
Thank you. This idea of religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time, some mark the beginning of that idea with the passage of the International Religious Freedom Act in 1998. And we're going to discuss that today, where we've come from, where we're headed, and we have three amazing panelists with us today. I would like to introduce Imam Majid, who is the Executive Imam of the Al Dulles Area Muslim Society. Would you welcome Imam Majid, please? Our next panelist is Rabbi David Saperstein, the Director Emeritus of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and also the former Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. Would you welcome Rabbi Saperstein? And of course, Dr. Tom Farr is the president and co-founder of the Religious Freedom Institute. Dr. Farr. Wonderful. Well, we're going to have a conversation with three really smart people who know a lot of stuff, probably more than I do, certainly. But what I'd like to do is maybe allow you each to have 3 or 4 minutes as an opening statement, and then we'll go from there and ask questions. Tom, could I ask you to please begin?
Thank you, David.
We're doing it from our seats, David? From our seats?
I want briefly to highlight 3 founding moments of what Secretary Pompeo this morning correctly called this lovely, God-driven international religious freedom movement. My first founding moment was the passage of the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. No surprise there. Its founders and thought leaders are my heroes, every one of them. I can't name them all, but I do want to mention a few who fashioned the IRFA and implemented it in its early years. Congressman Frank Wolf and Chris Smith, a senator named Sam Brownback, Ambassador David Saperstein, who is nearby, who way back in 1998, you may not know, also served as the first chairman of the IRF Commission. I want to mention 2 men with whom I served in the State Department in those early years, the first and second IRF ambassadors, Bob Seipel and John Hanford. Many thought leaders shaped the law and U.S. policy in the early days, such as Cole Durham, Nina Shea, Katrina Lantos Sweat, Paul Marshall, Mary Ann Glendon. Thought leaders outside the U.S. were key to the new movement as well, such as England's Lord David Alton and Mervyn Thomas, founder of Christian Solidarity Worldwide. Each of these people have personally witnessed the devastating effects of religious persecution on human beings, on families, and on entire societies. Each has dedicated much, if not all, of his or her life to advancing religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. The second founding moment that I want to mention was the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That profoundly important declaration internationalized the powerful idea that some human rights, including the right of religious freedom, are inalienable. A major drafter of that declaration was the great Lebanese philosopher Charles Malik. His son, Habib, is here with us today. The third founding moment was the 1776 Declaration of Independence, an American Declaration of Independence, in which our founders declared to the world, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that each is endowed by his Creator with unalienable or inalienable rights," unquote. The summit charter, which is, by the way, out in the Carter, if you'd like to read it and sign it, you're welcome to, reflects 2 core principles from the American Declaration of Independence that are critically important for this 21st century God-driven international movement. The first is that religious freedom is about religion and the right to be religious. It protects, of course, the right to reject religion, but that's not its intrinsic purpose. Religious freedom protects the right of everyone to believe in religious truths, or not. But if one does believe, the right to join with others of like mind and spirit in a religious community, and the right equally and within due limits to exercise their religion in order to shape the culture and the laws and the policies of their respective nations. The second principle from the American Declaration is that no human being of whatever opinion, status, or location can live a fully human life without religious freedom. That is precisely why religious freedom is properly understood as inalienable. It's not the gift of any government. It's the gift of God. The role of any just government is to protect this inalienable right for all of its citizens and all its religious communities, especially its minority religious communities. On the other hand, if there are no inalienable rights, if all rights are equal, then our rights are simply what those with power say they are. That is precisely the approach taken by totalitarian governments throughout history, including the Chinese Communist government today. So to sum up, religious freedom is the freedom of every human being to be religious, and it's a right given by God to each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very good, Tom.
Ambassador?
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with David Curry, my dear friends and distinguished colleagues, Tom Farr and Imam Majid, champions of religious freedom all. We were asked to set the IRF enterprise in context. I agree with almost every word that Tom just said. I'll come to one slight difference.
I feel much better.
Here, but setting it in context is different than my normal talks, focusing on the persecuted and the oppressed. I have 4 points I would have liked to have made, but time for only 2. So here they go. The first involves a paradox. We are here because our cause involves advocacy for the millions and millions of the oppressed and persecuted. Yet, in viewing IRF in a broader context, as we look at the sweep of the post-World War II history and at the ebb and flow of human rights and religious freedom, and look at where the midpoint has gone, Freedom House, who has been measuring such trends since the end of World War II, points out that the midpoint of the ebb and flow of human rights and religious freedom worldwide showed an expansion through 2006, obviously energized by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and has been retrenching since 2006, spurred by the recent expansion of authoritarian regimes. The question for us is whether the cooperative endeavors of democratic governments, civil society, religious, legal, human rights organizations, all working together pushing religious freedom and human rights, achieve much good and prevented things from being much worse. I truly believe that with the defeat of the Axis, the winding down of colonialism, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, that the post-World War II gains far outreach the losses. We all focus rightfully on the Pew finding that with the alarming and deteriorating state of religious freedoms within so many of the world's most populous nations, 80% of the world's population lives in countries with severe restrictions on religious freedoms, too often up to the level of crimes against humanity. But we ignore the Pew finding that 3/4 of the world's countries have no serious restrictions, and most religion flourishes. As terrible as things are in too many places in which our efforts are rightfully focused, the work that democratic governments with the civil society and religious communities have done in the past 75 years have made things far better across the globe than they otherwise would have been. In other words, your work makes a difference, and your work will be absolutely indispensable in making a difference for good in the coming decades. The second point addresses the relationship that we have heard several times today between IRF and human rights. Here, it is true that if there are no unalienable rights, then rights are just positive rights, whatever decided. But the fact that there may be more than one unalienable right is also true. And at the core of our human rights agenda is a series of rights that we regard in our American context as unalienable rights. Here. So this often takes the expression of should there be separate religious freedom officers and ambassadors, or should the office and staff come under the human rights sections of the American government or foreign ministries as it does in many countries across the globe. So let me be clear, as Tony Blinken and Samantha Powers and Melissa Rogers and others have argued, because I think this is true across the political spectrum, you cannot have freedom of the pulpit, freedom to worship, freedom to proselytize if you do not have freedom of speech. You cannot print Bibles and prayer books and educational materials and bulletins, have websites, prayer books, have websites, religious TV shows, newspapers, and social media accounts without freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of association. And conversely, You cannot have those other human rights if there is no freedom of religion or freedom of conscience. Human rights in general, the core unalienable rights, and religious freedom are interwoven and reinforcing. While I acknowledge differing motives when IRFA was passed, in the main, when we established that separate office and ambassadorship and USERF, the consensus was that it was urgently needed because religious freedom was simply not given its due as a foundational human right. It was an ignored stepchild in the human rights world. 23 years later, just look around at this summit. What we did worked. And so my abiding personal thanks, and I suspect your thanks as well, to Frank Wolf and his colleagues for driving the IRF process, to Sam Brownback's vision and leadership, and the tireless IRF office headed still by the gifted Dan Nadell in creating the ministerials and the alliance. Our thanks to USERF in Canada and the Obama IRF office I was a part of, with a shout out to the remarkable Knox teams for the contact group and the parliamentary coalition. The question now in the U.S. isn't whether we should merge those offices structurally. Politically in the United States, that won't and should not happen. The question rather is how to coordinate more functionally and effectively religious freedom and broader human rights. I want every human rights officer to own and every ambassador to own the religious freedom agenda as part of their work for human rights. And I want the religious freedom officers to be comfortable in weaving together religious freedom within a human rights context. Most particularly, we will never secure religious freedom until we have ensured that the broader legal and human rights principle that no citizen's rights in any country should ever depend on their religious identity, beliefs, or peaceful practices becomes the reality in every nation on earth. They are one and the same in terms of reinforcing each other. I'm proud of the model that America offers on that, and it is vitally needed in the coming decades.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Imam Majid.
It's very tough to follow.
Indeed.
David Silverstein. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Brownback and the great team for putting this together. Really, it's very important for all of us to continue this effort, and I'm quite sure some of you have come from far away to be part of this conference so we can advance religious freedom around the globe. This day is considered one of the holy days for Muslims. It's the month of pilgrimage, especially these 10 days. And it reminds me of the story of Abraham, Prophet Abraham, who left Iraq, according to Islamic teaching. I'm quite sure some theologian is going to debate with me the history. But according to Islamic history, he left Iraq because of persecutions and went from Iraq to Egypt, from Egypt to Mecca, and from Mecca to Jerusalem. Abraham was a global citizen, looking for religious freedom. And I remember that group of us went to Vatican to sit together around Abrahamic initiative to see how can we advance religious freedom using theology of inclusive, teaching of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and could be Hinduism, Buddhism, for all religion. How can we create theology that protect, promote, advance religious freedom in our communities? You know, it is very important for me to see that the group of representatives of community being persecuted in this conference, David and I and Dr. Kent from Dr. Farr organization, we went to the Rohingya. and we have seen what happened to those people. When you hear about people being persecuted in the news, you hear about numbers. This is how many people being persecuted, how many people being killed, how many churches, mosques, or synagogues being burned. But until and unless you see the people faces and you realize what they went through, it will not be the same reading it in newspaper. That's why I'm so happy to see that people who stood here and spoke to you about what they went through. There's a verse in the Holy Quran that says, no compulsion religion. We have held our own community accountable to this. With the initiative of Marrakesh Declaration, with Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, we had 240 Muslim scholars, Shia and Sunni, to sign that declaration. And you can see a copy of it at Adams Center booth, where we made a commitment to protect religious minority or citizens of other religion living in majority Muslim countries. This is a matter of principle. And I think every faith community have to hold their own people accountable and to create their own covenant of protecting religious minority or people of other faith in majority faith, whatever Christianity, Islam, Judaism, because there is no religion is a majority always. With the global village, we might be a minority in one place, but a majority in another place. And we have to promote and protect the rights of people of other faith as we promote and advocate for our own faith. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. In the few minutes we have, I want to try to get as many questions in as I can to kind of set this law in context as what it's done around the world, maybe some unfulfilled potential thus far, and maybe even some cultural things. Dr. Farr, I'm going to start with a question to you. What can we do now that, as a government, as a people, with this law that we couldn't have done in 1997? I mean, what powers did it give you, that give our government, that you think is significant?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with my friend David Saperstein, and that does happen between us every now and then. In fact, I can remember something that he said very early, probably in 99 or 2000, that, we've got foreign service officers for the first time. I don't know if you remember this. Junior foreign service officers who are writing this religious freedom report for the first time. It's been done now for 22, 23 years. Then we didn't have a religious freedom report. We had a human rights report, but it didn't focus on this. So from that very modest beginning and the expectation that it would grow, I agree with him that this has taken legs that are beyond encouraging to somebody who's been laboring in the vineyards as we have for so long. Just to see the people in this audience, the Americans that are in this audience, who have not until now hopefully been invested in this issue. Part of the purpose of this summit is to allow Americans who may not be aware of what's going on around there to see how precious this right is for everyone throughout the world. So the answer to your question, David, is that although we could not have foreseen what has happened, I honestly believe that what David says is correct, that while the stories are terrible, I wept this morning. I'm sure some of you did at some of the things that I heard. And yet there is such hope because of this Building International Alliance, because of the awakening awareness of all of the American people of the importance of this. And I would add my deep gratitude for the administration, at least two of their spokespeople saying today that they will have an ambassador at large nominated within the next few weeks. I think that is terrific.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Ambassador, in your time in office and before and after, I mean, how have you seen the efficacy of this law take place? Are there challenges to it or limits to it that you might tweak over time? I mean, you've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start where Tom left off. We've had 23 years of that report, which means thousands of Foreign Service officers have had to deal with it, and it's been reviewed by the head of the political section and the ambassador and the desk officer in the State Department and the regional desk in the State Department before going up to the secretary. The system is really put it into effect here. And that report gets used by many countries around the world as kind of a blueprint for their Foreign Service officers because they don't produce their own report. And it becomes invaluable. And I heard over and over again from people, particularly the smallest groups, the ones that feel so isolated, saying, we didn't know anyone knew about us. You've taken our story and you've lifted it up for the world. Our lawyers take your report as the first document they submit to show that our treatment violates international law. Here, before Madeleine Albright, we had many great secretaries of state. Almost none of them ever talked about religious freedom. Today, what you heard from Secretary Pompeo, what you heard from Secretary Blinken, it's inconceivable that it wouldn't be a mainstay of discussion in general about where we are. You helped make that happen here. The real challenge for us, David, is how do we get more teeth into it? Sanctions can be helpful in certain situations, particularly where there are proto-democratic, quasi-democratic institutions to build on. Think about the impact of sanctions on South Africa with its labor unions, its outspoken religious community, its relatively free newspapers. But where there is absent those, it is very hard that sanctions actually are going to have a short-term impact. It may over a long period of time have it. What are the other tools that we need? I think we all agree that that's the area we have to really focus on more. And I would also ask for more data about actually evaluating what works and doesn't work and the analysis of why. There's not the rigor that we really need for that. So you talk about tweaking it. Those are the things I would focus on.
Great. Do you want to address that question?
Yes, I would like us to talk about the role of the civil society.
Please.
I do believe that government has a role to play in pressuring other government, but I do believe the civil society really have a big role to play in really addressing the issue of religious freedom in grassroots level. I'm so glad that Sudan is off the list. And I do believe that civil society in Sudanese community in Sudan have played a role in addressing this issue. And I'm so glad that, Ambassador David Saperstein visit to Sudan have played a role in that. I was with him in that visit. And he met with civil society in Sudan. We met with the Christian community and religious community. And therefore, I do believe that people who are here from the civil society, they have a big role to play in helping advancing the law on the ground.
Yeah. And Imam Majid, Mohammed El Sanusi, a whole range of civil society people played a very important role in the changes that happened, or preparing the groundwork for changes that came about in Sudan.
Yeah, the limits of the law, sort of that boundary is where culture and our other environments pick up. And one of the things that we have to be honest about in this room is that if there's hesitancy for Christians to speak out on behalf of Muslims who are being persecuted, or for Hindus to speak out on behalf of Christians. I mean, if we have these internecine sort of restrictions, that it hurts us. What can we do as a family here of brothers and sisters under God to improve the cultural understanding of how we can support each other so that we're speaking out for each other, everybody encouraging each other on this religious freedom? How do you see that as maybe being a way we can improve?
Bob Roberts, myself, and David, we started this organization, a multi-faith neighborhood network, which is meant to have people of faith to stand for each other, especially in community where we believe there's persecution, discriminations. And I just want to say that there's also aspect of racism mixed with religious freedom. I just want to say that. Like you have in some places not only been persecuted as Muslim or as Christian, but because also ethnic minorities. Sure. And therefore, the issue of religious freedom has to be connected to the issue of diversity, creating inclusive community. I would like to say that people also have really impacted by this the most are women and young people. And I do believe that in our approach to religious freedom, we should not overlook that the role of women, and in this panel, all of us men, I'm sorry about that, but the role of women in advancing religious freedom and being subject also to persecutions. And I do believe that we have to create an environment by which that none of us, whether Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, will accept and allow women to be excluded from this, intellectual, religious discourse about religious freedom.
Amen. Yeah, that's worthy.
Thank you, Umar.
So some final thoughts. Dr. Farr, what are you optimistic about?
Oh, well, I'm a Christian. I'm optimistic because I believe the victory's been won. That's the first thing to be said. But that very optimism leads me to want religious freedom for every human being, because I believe my Lord and Savior wants me to do that. It wants me to treat all the people God created as seekers of truth. Jesus didn't coerce anybody. He drew people to him. We need to think in those terms as Christians. And I would ask each of you to think about your faith, whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever your faith is, draw from it to defend those who are not of your faith. It's there. Find it and defend your brothers and sisters who are seeking the truth just as you are.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Yeah, I would just build on the last two things that we heard. Here, there's nothing wrong with having a group that's primarily focused on your own faith community and the desperate needs we have. There are Christians being persecuted all across the globe, and there are organizations that do extraordinary work, David, here that have a particular focus on that. So long as we all recognize that in any country where any group can be subject to persecution and oppression and ethnic cleansing, no group ultimately be safe. Mm-hmm. We really are in this together. And when I see us get together like this, how can you not be optimistic? This is exactly what we need. Our friend Chris Seipel talks about we really have to be intentional about religious literacy, learning about other religions, not trying necessarily to convert each other every time we're together, but learn about each other with an understanding what he calls covenantal pluralism, of a respect for other traditions as well. That has to be the foundation we have. But when I look across the globe in my travels, I've been to over 80 countries, and 35 of them in the time I was at the State Department. Here, everywhere I see interfaith coalitions where 40 years ago they just didn't exist. It's been done with intentionality by our government that's really trained people on how to do that work very quietly, often behind the scenes, by other democratic countries, and it's been modeled by you folks in terms of the coalitions that you have been part of. So every moment of this conference, when I listen to the stories, when I hear the achievements, when I understand deeper the challenges, and I see us come together in good spirit, that is the source of optimism that this world needs more than anything. So to all of you, thank you.
Amen.
Great. I'm afraid that's all our time. Would you please give our panel another hand? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Religious freedom is important because religion is important.
It's the freedom to discover if there is a creator, if there is a source that is greater than human. Religious freedom is necessary for everybody. So we created RFI to do the hard work of figuring out how in every different society we could advance religious freedom.
The three main objectives of the Religious Freedom Institute are research at its base, and we have impact. In the middle, our focus on education is the bridge.
We seek to develop evidence-based research to inform policy questions about religious freedom.
I think RFI can make a tremendous difference, and I think the issue should always be bipartisan because there are good people on both sides that care about it.
I've written 2 religious freedom laws in the last couple of years, and in both of those bills, who did I turn to? RFI leadership. It was that expertise that they bring that is unparalleled.
This is vital work for everybody. Help us do the hard work. Partner with us in the Religious Freedom Institute.
Welcome IRF Summit Senior Advisor, Pam Pryor.
Okay, it's too bad we couldn't find people passionate about this subject, right? They were great. And thanks to many of the good people on that panel, we have a charter for religious freedom. If you would like to sign the charter and be part of making sure that it is embedded in all aspects of civic life by promoting the socioeconomic benefits of religious freedom, sign up to what? Lead, join, or follow this global campaign. Text charter to 844-403-2291. Now, also out in the lobby, right out these doors and to my left, there is a big oversized charter. There's a Sharpie right there too. And we'd love for you all to sign your name on that charter. Take a picture, post to social media, and then at the end of this conference, we're going to take a picture of that charter with the signed names on it and put it on the IRF Secretariat website. So we really look forward to you participating in that, okay? Text charter, and otherwise get ready for another panel. Thank you.
Please welcome Chief Grant Officer, Templeton Religion Trust, Chris Stewart.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Stewart. I'm the Chief Grants Officer of the Templeton Religion Trust. I want to introduce the main idea of this session on the role of philanthropy, which is that funders, whether institutional donors like Templeton Religion Trust or even individual donors, are usually interested in funding activity related to religious freedom or liberty of conscience, not only because of its inherent importance as a human right, but also because of its relation to some larger interest or strategic purpose with respect to which religious freedom contributes something or is an enabling condition. For the Trust, this larger strategic purpose is something we call covenantal pluralism. In a moment, we're going to show you a 3-minute video that introduces this idea, after which Eric Patterson of the Religious Freedom Institute, which has been a grantee of TRT, is going to lead a conversation with a panel of other grantees and one allied funder that will illustrate the main idea of this session, which again is the importance of understanding the alignment between what your organization does and the wider strategic aims of the potential donor. Each of the grantees on the panel will be commenting on how the work they do with support from the Trust aligns with covenantal pluralism. As I mentioned, the panel also features one other funder, the El Hebri Foundation, led by Farhan Latif, with whom we've partnered to fund the activities of some organizations, again, because of an alignment between some of the wider strategic purposes of El Hebri and those of TRT, again, illustrating the main idea of this session. Thank you, and we'll take a look at the video now.
Religious diversity is a fact, and tolerance, the conventional wisdom. Tolerance is a great starting point, but it can easily lead to apathy or indifference. We tolerate things we don't like, things like back pain or toothaches. Sir John Templeton thought we could do better. In fact, he believed that there's a vast, untapped potential beyond tolerance. But how do we get there? It starts with humility. If we have the humility to admit that none of us has all the answers, then shouldn't we be eager to learn from other points of view? So, what needs to be added to diversity and tolerance to get to pluralism? In a word, engagement. Pluralism, or what we like to call covenantal pluralism, entails the responsibility to engage, respect, and protect one another without necessarily regarding one another's beliefs or behaviors as equally true or right. That's why we're working to identify, understand, and promote conditions that bring about the sort of open-minded, cooperative competition that Sir John envisioned would lead to progress in religions and in society at large. Conditions like free access to spiritual information of all kinds and an environment free of religious or secular coercion. It includes character virtues such as humility, empathy, patience, and courage, and religious literacy. And besides, there are problems we can't solve on our own, but only together. Engagement across differences accelerates discovery and leads to progress, producing social dividends that flow from religious faith and practice at its best. Transforming religious diversity from a troublesome reality simply to be tolerated into a positive force. Covenantal pluralism.
Welcome to the stage, Executive Vice President, Religious Freedom Institute, Eric Patterson.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you here where we're all united in championing religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. I'd like to introduce you to this next panel, 4 distinguished public servants. Let me start with, first, Zinat Rahman, the project director of the Aspen Institute's Inclusive America Project. Also joining us is Farhan Latif, the president of the El Hebri Foundation. Our next panelist is the Vice President for Global Operations at the Institute for Global Engagement, James Chen. And finally, the president and the founder of Hardwired Global, Tina Ramirez. Now, as you know, this panel is about covenantal pluralism as an approach to championing religious freedom globally. And in a moment, we'll ask each of our panelists to say something about covenantal pluralism as they understand it, and then later hear from them about how their organizations are actually taking action on the ground. Let me say, for my organization, the Religious Freedom Institute, that we think about covenantal pluralism as the definition that we've heard Chris Seipel, one of our friends, talk about different groups with different beliefs and different actions, different behaviors, nonetheless committing to mutual respect and engagement within their society. And this is consonant with our mission at the Religious Freedom Institute. Our mission is to achieve broad acceptance of religious freedom as a fundamental human right, as a source of individual and societal flourishing, as a foundation or a cornerstone for successful society, and as a driver for international and national security. So let me turn it over to our panelists, and we'll start with Zina, and then we'll work down. Would you tell our audience how you and your organization understand covenantal pluralism?
Sure. Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you came back after lunch to be with us. I was a little worried. As I think about the covenantal pluralism framework, I think that one thing it does very well is that it acknowledges reality on the ground. Those realities are that religious diversity is a fact. It's not going anywhere, it is growing, and it's something that we have to work with. The second is that whoever is a majority somewhere is a minority somewhere else, and I think that just beautifully points to our interdependence as humanity. And I think it's important to have a framework to engage that. And the third, which I don't need to tell this crowd, but which I think is important to state, is that we believe at the Aspen Institute and the Inclusive America Project that religion is a force for good in the world. Our eyes are not closed to the ways that religion has been used for negative ways, but we think that religion is a positive and pro-social force, as does the Templeton Religion Trust. And their definition of covenantal pluralism resonates because I think it is for builders. You know, I think there is a role to play for people to call out atrocities and publish reports about that. But I think covenantal pluralism affords a framework that centers relationship building, that also acknowledges difference. And so it's not syncretism, it is not, you know, interfaith lowest common denominator. It is saying that we have many difficult differences, but the only way that I will have respect for the things that I believe in the world is if I give you mutual respect and understanding. And I think it's a framework that could be very powerful because clearly when you look at the big challenges we have to solve for in the world, we're not going to just be able to solve them with, you know, those who share the same faith as us or the same ideology as us. And so I think it's just a powerful way to think about how we engage other people in the world, driven by something that's important to most of us, which is our faith.
You know, thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you, Templeton Religion Trust organizers, International Religious Freedom supporters, for affording us the opportunity to be at this panel and not to be on Zoom again. You know, at the foundation, we operate within the framework that how do we build an inclusive America by advancing peace and respect for diversity inspired by the universally shared values of Islam. And we do so by investing in building American Muslim civil society and social sector, investing in organizations and leaders, in partnership with allies to build a more inclusive society and in a society where people can thrive, contribute, and build a greater social fabric. So there are many elements of covenantal pluralism that resonate, you know, with us, and I think at the crux of it, it is looking at the issue of difference that exist within different religious groups, but also difference that exist within a faith tradition itself, and how do you use that difference for constructive cooperation and engagement. And as Zenith also stated, you know, and the video talked about, diversity is a fact, it exists, but without engagement, it does not lead to a pluralistic society. And from our vantage point, the real heavy lift happens by individual social sector leaders, faith leaders, working towards common cause. And if philanthropy can support that, amplify that, scale that, then we see a better society. So that's our perspective.
Yeah, thank you. For us, covenantal pluralism, when the Templeton Religion Trust started to introduce this concept, we felt that it was really great because, you know, religious freedom, we see it as, you know, most of us perceive it as a right. Covenantal pluralism can be seen as an ideal end state. You know, what are you working towards? And, you know, when we're engaging with different partners overseas, with governments or with, you know, religious leaders, talking about covenantal pluralism, about how different communities speak up for one another, engage with each other, build relationships with each other. That's what we're hopefully working towards, as opposed to just saying, you have to have religious freedom because that's the right thing to do. If we say these concepts of covenantal pluralism, that's something I think most governments in most countries would want to would buy into. So that's proven to be very helpful for us.
Well, I just want to thank the Templeton Religion Trust as well for their support of the work that we've done around the world and really embodying their support for this idea of covenantal pluralism. My organization, Hardwired, was founded on the idea that this freedom of speech, of conscience, of belief, and the differences of opinion that people have within that space, that these are essential qualities for how we are. We like to say it's how we're hardwired, this innate impulse to be free, to have those differences. And yet, in societies where it doesn't exist, we see chaos. So for us, we believe that really covenantal pluralism is at the heart of what we do, and we believe that differences of opinion can be aspects that can create vibrant discussions rather than flashpoints of conflict. So whereas most people will look at those differences and think conflict, we think let's get in there and let's help people within their differences find space to live and respect one another. And it really compels, I think, each one of us to reach beyond tolerance, to really embody a mutual respect and understanding for the other, for their dignity, for their value as human beings, and to create societies that respect that. So that's really what Hardwired is all about.
So we've talked a little bit about ideas, so let's talk about practice. What is a program or an activity where your organization has seen fruit on the ground? I'll say for the Religious Freedom Institute, an example of our on-the-ground work that tries to advance religious liberty is our work in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq, where over the next 18 months, thousands of college students will go through a program that's about pluralism and tolerance and recognizing not just the rich religious diversity of the country, but how that's a benefit to all of the citizens in the country. It's a sacred trust that proceeds throughout history in Iraq. It's something to be treasured, not something to be destroyed. How about for you?
So there's a few things I want to say. One is just, I've been toying with the idea of what does it mean to have covenant with one another, right? And obviously there's a religious connotation, but the idea of beyond a promise, it's a pact. And I think where our work sits with the Inclusive America Project at the Aspen Institute, it's really around what is the relationship between citizen to citizen, and how do you build the capacity of faith leaders and other social sector leaders, as Farhan said, to find their common ground and do good in the world. But we do it around really difficult issues. And so, we just had a multi-sectoral roundtable around religious freedom, where we had, folks from all different orientations on religious freedom. But we think that there are not enough spaces and places where people can actually have those difficult conversations. And we get messy and we do it, and I think that in that way we see our role as helping to build kind of the scaffolding or the infrastructure for that engagement between leaders, which there are many examples of at the summit. We just saw 2 on stage, but that we need more of that, and we need everybody to kind of have an understanding and orientation of that. And then one more word, which is the role of philanthropy, is critical. And Templeton's playing a special role, because Templeton Religion Trust, because many times funders, through their grant making, they implicitly convey a theory of change and or a slant to their philanthropy. By putting together a covenantal pluralism framework and then introducing it through their own way, so not just through their grantees, which I think we all represent that, but saying this is actually important for philanthropy to consider, has been a really big help to us at Aspen, because we convene different members of different funders, different people from foundations, to have those conversations around what does pluralism mean, where are the hard lines, et cetera.
Thanks.
We sit in an exciting spot to see some of the most exciting things in society come together on this. Last year, or earlier this year, I remember walking into one of the largest mosques here in the DMV area, Adams Center. Imam Majid was just here on stage. And to walk inside, and you would expect people to be praying and the usual activity, but to see healthcare workers administering vaccines, and to see it becoming a testing site. And we see this in our networks across the nation in this last year. Gurdwaras, mosques, synagogues, churches, becoming centers responding to the crisis from the last year. I mean, that is covenantal pluralism in action. And supporting that, amplifying that, you know, is part of what we see this work in action. And it goes back to, you know, Sir Templeton said this, and we find this in the Quran as well, which is competing to do good. That's the manifestation of that. We see projects like Zenith, the Aspen Inclusive America Project, and seeing the work there, Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, Pastor Bob and Imam Majid, Rabbi Saperstein. I mean, these are the great projects that I think really epitomize covenantal pluralism in action.
Yeah, so for IGE, the way covenantal pluralism plays into our work is that first and foremost, we try to model it. So we are an evangelical Christian organization, but we work for the freedom of religion and belief conscience for all groups. And whenever we engage in a country, we specifically engage whatever the majority faith or group in that country is. So, you know, if it's in Myanmar, it's with Buddhists. If it's in Uzbekistan, it's with Muslims or the government. And sometimes that, you know, it brings questions to many of our, you know, supporters, our donor base. But if you want to change to be sustainable, you'll have to have complete buy-in from the majority, you know, as well as the minority that you're trying to help. And ultimately, we believe that covenantal pluralism will benefit the entire country and all the people. It'll lead to a flourishing state, you know, developing economy, and all sorts of beneficial outcomes. So we try to involve both majorities and minorities and to build trust between them.
So in the field of education, our programs are really cultivating a culture of covenantal pluralism in the schools and in the classrooms. In Iraq, as many of you know, children across northern Iraq were brainwashed by ISIS and taught to hate and kill people of different beliefs, and those children remain there. And the rich historical diversity that was Iraq, I've been all over the country and I've seen it firsthand, is really at risk. Teachers that are returning to those areas are very concerned for their children. Children that remained under ISIS and the ones that are refugees that are returning are having a lot of conflict. They want to break the cycle of conflict and overcome the hate and the intolerance that led to that, but they don't know how. And so that's why the Templeton-funded project that we're doing in northern Iraq to train teachers to overcome the bias and the misconceptions and the fear that children have of one another is able to occur, so that they have the tools and the resources to really embody covenantal pluralism, which is to learn to respect the differences and the dignity of one another, especially those with whom they disagree. And, you know, as I said before, our goal is never to get them to always agree with one another. It's actually just to find a place of respect and dignity in their differences.
So last question for the panel, and it's a question we heard on the last panel, and it has to do with the future. Naysayers would say a big meeting like this, what is this doing? Is there really hope for a change in our world when it comes to religious freedom, when it comes to covenantal pluralism? What are you optimistic about? One of the things I'm optimistic about is the fact that people are uniting across denominational and religious lines, and that it is not simply the old guard in a sense, but that there's a mobilization of young people who believe in this. That, to me, is a sign for a lot of hope. How about for the rest of you?
I think I'm always optimistic when I get closest to the people who are doing the work, you know, so when I'm with the faith leaders on the ground grappling with these issues every day, there's a proverb that says, like, plant a seed even if you won't enjoy, plant the seed of a tree even if you won't enjoy its shade. And so I think I'm optimistic, but I also think all of us have a responsibility to do. you know, not just to talk or not just to write, but to like do something in the world. And so many of us have concerns that are global and important and all of that, but also what are we doing with our neighbors, you know? So try to keep it very kind of pragmatic and front and center. What are we all doing to build? And I think like that's what I would put out to the audience is, you know, how are you all building? And we all have enormous privilege by being in this room. And I think the connections that happen between people here show that there is, you know, that there is meaning to us all being together and just appreciating that coming out of a pandemic. But I think I'm very optimistic about all of the good stories you hear coming out of that, and alongside the fact that it's not enough to just do good. Like, we actually have a mandate, because the people who would want to see a non-pluralistic world, see a non-pluralistic environment, they're very motivated as well. And so, you know, I think my charge is just that, you know, pick something and do it. And I think covenantal pluralism framework gives us a good lens by which to view how we might begin.
Thank you, Zina. I think, you know, as a Muslim, you're hardwired to be optimistic from a faith-based lens.
Thank you.
But you know, in terms of just looking and reflecting at the last year, I mean, the incredible response of faith-based communities working across lines of difference to respond to some of the greatest challenges of our time has been very inspiring, and it gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And unlocking that potential across the nation, and we're seeing stories from overseas as well, from the pandemic and from different countries. I think there's just a lot of things to look forward to.
For me, in our work, I probably point to Central Asia, specifically Uzbekistan, as one of the areas where it's been really encouraging. You know, you're thinking about a country that was part of the former Soviet Union, and then afterwards it was under, you know, very strict authoritarian government for decades. And then all in the span of, you know, 4 years, it's almost completely turned around. And it's, you know, one of the 3 countries that's ever come off of the State Department's country of particular concern list. You know, we were just there a few months ago, and you know, the first Uzbek Bible has now been published. You know, been translated and published, and so just really seeing that and how, you know, this approach of covenantal pluralism, they've really bought into. So not the kind of name, blame, and shame, seeing how, you know, you guys are not doing this right, you have to do it this way, but rather, you know, this is the end state. And you know, they say, well, yeah, we agree. This is what we want to work towards, because Uzbekistan was historically the crossroads of civilization and a center of you know, Islamic scientific innovation and theological scholarship, and that's a legacy that they want to, you know, rediscover and to promote. So, you know, and that benefits all groups in the country. So that's been really encouraging to see.
Well, I've had an opportunity to work with so many of you over the years when I was directing the Religious Freedom Caucus in the US Congress, and we constantly were responding to cases of persecution, and then I decided to start Hardwired because I wanted to, you know, get on the ground with you and really go into these countries and help, you know, you advocate and, you know, just really deal with the root causes of this conflict so people could find freedom. And last year I published a children's book called The Peaceful Garden, and it kind of, I was reminded of it as Zina was talking, because it was inspired by these 2 teachers from Iraq that went through my training, that we teach them using analogies. So they ended up developing a lesson with their students where they took them all from the refugee camps to this garden in northern Iraq, and they said, look at this beautiful garden, now go and make a bouquet of flowers, but just don't choose this one color. So the kids went and they made bouquets of flowers, and they came back and they were so proud. And the teacher said, your bouquets are beautiful, but look back at the garden and see what happened. So the children looked back and they realized that they had really just destroyed the garden, and the only thing was left was this one little color, kind of just not looking so good. And the teacher said, well, this is what happened in our country when ISIS came in. They destroyed everyone except for the people that looked like them and believed like them. And in that moment, all of the children were very sad because they each, from their different religion and ethnic backgrounds, had experienced that destruction. And the teacher said, well, do you want to live this way, or do you prefer the other garden? They said, no, we like the other one better. And so they gave them a packet of seeds, and they said, now go back and plant the garden together. And so they did. And over the course of a few months, the teachers taught them about this idea of covenantal pluralism and freedom of conscience and belief, and broke down their fears and misconceptions. And they gathered back at the garden. It was beautiful. And the teacher said, "What did you learn?" And this one Yazidi boy said, "Well, I thought all Muslims were like ISIS, and then I met this other refugee, and he was persecuted just like me. And I realized that we're the same." And they began to break down their barriers and see the humanity in one another. And another child said, "Look, we know that peace is hard and freedom is hard, but we don't want to go back. And you've given us these seeds to plant the seeds of peace and freedom and hope for our future." And I think that story really embodies this idea of covenantal pluralism. Regardless of whether we agree or not, we can all treat one another with dignity and respect. And those are the seeds that we've been planting through our education work and with the support of the Templeton Religion Trust for several years now in Iraq. And that gives me hope, because if we can do it there, we can do it everywhere, even here.
That's right. So, lightning round. Last comment.
Just, Tina, I'm inspired. I want a copy of your book. My 6-year-old's in the audience, so we're going to buy it for her. But I just want to plug also that this was a lightning round of a panel, but tomorrow at 3:15, you can have an opportunity to learn how you work with foundations and funders like Templeton Religion Trust. It's being chaired by my colleague, Dr. Allison Ralph. And so it'll be in the program booklet. But I would say if you want to know more about how you work with philanthropy to do this work, please attend that session.
Yes, to buying that book. I would say to my peer funders that the work that's happening on the ground, bottom up, and in cases top down, just needs to be amplified and supported and resourced further. And so if there are other foundations and philanthropies that are interested in this work, there are different doors to enter this space and amplify the work that's happening. That's what.
Yeah, if you want to find out more about covenantal pluralism, check out IGE's academic journal. It's called the Review of Faith and International Affairs. There's an article from Chris Seipel and Dennis Hoover about covenantal pluralism. Check it out. Thank you.
Well, and I just want to thank the Templeton Religion Trust and Eric for coordinating this amazing panel and allowing us the opportunity to share the inspiring stories of things that we get to do to really begin to mitigate conflict and help people find greater freedom and dignity, because all of us here have that same mission. So you can go to hardwireglobal.org to learn more about the children's books. I think tomorrow Kathy Ireland will be here, and she actually did a public reading of one of the books that you can find on our website. It's called Fruitopia. So yes, we use a lot of funny things, but I have a 6-year-old as well, and she likes it. So, and then my colleague Victoria Tigas is right up here in the front, and she'll be here all week to talk to you if you would like more information as well. But thank you.
Yeah, on behalf of all of our panel, thanks to the Templeton Religion Trust. And it's easy during this time with churches closed, mosques closed, synagogues attacked in the past year, to look only on the negative, and there's a lot of negative. But I've been inspired in part today, and I've been reminded, as Farhan said, that it was religious groups on the front lines fighting back during COVID to help people, to bear witness to their faith, bear witness against governments that were shutting them down and trying to throttle that, governments that were scapegoating people. And those are all important, heroic stories. I've read the books. Get the books as well and visit any of our booths, including the Religious Freedom Institute, out in the lobby. Would you help me in thanking our panelists?
Thank you. Thank you.
Shockingly, about 40% of the world's population live in countries where they don't have the freedom to choose their religion, change their religion, to worship in community, or even to speak freely about their faith. ADF International created the Global Religious Freedom Team in 2018 in response to the growing efforts of authoritarian regimes to stamp out Christianity and other minority religions. When we started this work, we reached out to all of our contacts on the ground in countries where the persecution is most severe. And what we heard from them is that there were coordinated efforts to raise awareness of the persecution, and there were coordinated efforts for humanitarian assistance. But again and again, what we were told is that no coordinated legal efforts existed, and so that is the gap that we are seeking to fill. Our vision is to build up an alliance of lawyers in every country where persecution is severe and where legal remedies are viable in order to help those who are being persecuted through the legal system. Increasingly, we are able to be the bridge between those who are persecuted on the ground, the lawyers who are representing them, and the individuals in governments and the international institutions who hold the keys to power. For every pastor who is released, for every church that is able to remain open, for every missionary who is allowed to stay in his or her country. This has an enormous impact on the community. You can see how this is literally keeping the doors open for the gospel.
My name is Asiya Bibi, and I'm a Christian from Pakistan. I'm from the village of Chakitavli, which is in the district of Nankana Sahib in the Punjab region of Pakistan. I grew up with my parents and family. We were poor. My father, Salamat Masih, was a farmer. I married and had 2 daughters. My husband, Asik Masih, was in the army, and after he retired, he came to live in our village, where he started farming. My favorite memories of the village are the times of family fellowship we all shared during our Christmas and Easter celebrations. I was arrested and imprisoned in June 2009 and sentenced to death by hanging on a false accusation of blasphemy. Eventually, I was acquitted in October 2018. While I was in prison on death row, I worried a lot about my family and if they were safe, especially about my daughters. In Pakistan, many religious minorities are persecuted for alleged blasphemy. This is my story.
Please welcome Asya Bibi.
मसीह यसू में आप सबकी सलामती हो। मेरा नाम आसिया नूरीन है और मैं पाकिस्तानी मसीह औरत हूँ। मेरा भाई गांव करतारपुर है और ज़िला ननकाना साहब पाकिस्तान में, और मेरे बाप का नाम सलामत मसीह है और वालदा का नाम ईदा बीबी है, और मेरे 2 भाई और 5 बहनें हैं, और मेरे खामन का नाम आशिक मसीह है जो कि एक किसान है, और मेरी 2 बेटियां हैं जिसका नाम ईशा है जो कि स्पेशल चाइल्ड है, और छोटी का नाम इशम है। मैं खुदावन का तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ और खुदावन की शुक्रगुजारी करती हूँ कि जिसने मुझे उस मुसीबत से निकाल कर अपने जन्नत जैसे मुल्क में कनाडा में ले आया और नई ज़िंदगी दी और नई ज़िंदगी शुरू करने का मौका दिया और बच्चों से मुझे मिलाया। और मैं शुक्रगुजार हूँ IFR समत के लिए और जिन्होंने मेरे लिए मौका फराहम किया और मेरे दुख को समझा और अपने मसीह बहन भाइयों की आवाज़ बन सकूं। और ख़ास तौर पर शुक्रगुजार हूँ बरनाबास 8 के लिए और जिन्होंने मेरे लिए सारे इंतज़ाम किए। और मैं आज फैमिली को बहुत उन दिनों को मिस करती हूँ जो कि हम ईस्टर और क्रिसमस मिलकर सेलिब्रेट करते थे, और मैं पाकिस्तान को मिस करती हूँ और अपनी फैमिली को और अपने बहन भाइयों को, और मैं तमाम अपने बहन भाइयों को जो कि पाकिस्तान में हैं। और मैं जब जेल में थी बहुत परेशान थी अपनी फैमिली के लिए, अपने बच्चों के लिए, अपने शौहर के लिए, क्योंकि मैं नहीं जानती थी कि मेरे बच्चे किस हालात में हैं और वह ज़िंदा भी हैं कि नहीं और सेफ भी हैं कि नहीं। और मैं ख़ास तौर पर परेशान थी अपनी बेटियों के लिए और स्पेशली अपनी बड़ी बेटी ईशा के लिए जो कि स्पेशल चाइल्ड है। और मैं दिन रात खुदावन से दुआ करती थी और खुदावन मेरे बच्चों के साथ हो और मेरी बेटियों के साथ हो और मेरी फैमिली टोटली मेरी वजह से बहुत मुश्किल में थी और मुझे अपने खुदावन से उम्मीद थी कि खुदावन ने मौका अता किया ताकि मेरे जितने भी मसीह बहन भाई हैं उन्होंने मेरे लिए दुआएं की और रोज़े रखें और उनकी दुआओं के वसीला से आज मैं आज़ाद हूँ और मेरे बहन भाइयों ने मसीह बहन भाइयों ने मेरे लिए बहुत कोशिशें और काविशें की और मैं बड़ी शुक्रगुजार हूँ उन सब के लिए और तहे दिल से शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ और खुदावंद सबको बरकत दे और मैं अपनी कौम की आवाज़ बनना चाहती हूँ मसीह बहन भाइयों की जो कि कैद में हैं मुश्किल में मुसीबत में परेशानी में हैं आएँ आप मेरा बाजू बने और मेरे साथ खड़े हों ताकि हम इस अपने मुसीबत ज़्यादा बहन भाइयों की आवाज़ बने और इनको परेशानियों से निकालें जैसे कि खुदावन ने मुझे आज़ादी दी और खुदावन ने आज़ाद किया और आज मैं अपने बच्चों में हूँ तो खुदावन का फजल आप सब पर ठहर जाए और इसी तरह खुदा आप सबको भी हिम्मत ताकत कुव्वत अता करे और मेरी दुआएं हमेशा आप सबके साथ हों गॉड ब्लेस यू खुदा आप सबको बरकत दे आमीन
Welcome to the stage, Director of Advocacy for Global Religious Freedom, ADF International, Kelsey Zorzi.
Hi, it is a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Kelsey Zorzi. I serve as the Director of Advocacy for ADF International's Global Religious Freedom team. Asia Bibi's powerful story is a tragic encapsulation of the many legal challenges facing religious minorities around the world. This session now is dedicated to examining the legal root causes of persecution and discrimination on the basis of religion or belief. Our two distinguished speakers know very well the insidious ways in which laws, regulations, and practices are at work to marginalize and persecute religious minorities. Our keynote speaker, Archbishop Bashar Mati Warda, is the current Chaldean Catholic Archbishop of Erbil in Kurdistan, Iraq. He has been a zealous advocate for Iraq's Christian refugees and an instrumental promoter of interreligious dialogue, particularly during and after the attacks on the Christian community by the Islamic State. He is also the founder of the Catholic University in Erbil, which was inaugurated in 2015. Our second speaker, Archbishop Blinken Aykazian, is the Ecumenical Director of the Diocese of the Armenian Church of America. He is one of the most prominent representatives and spokesmen for the Armenian Church in the United States. The Armenian Church, having endured genocide and still facing widespread discrimination, violence, and persecution, has been among the most persecuted groups over the past century. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers.
Please welcome His Excellency Archbishop Bashar Mati Warda.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers for putting on this important event, which is so necessary for keeping the subject of persecution and religious discrimination from being forgotten. I'll speak today of my own experience in observing the impact of the persecution in Iraq as it occurred during the time of the ISIS war and the following years up to the present time. In particular, I will speak to you about the impact of persecution and displacement upon the most important social structure within any society. That's the family. In brief, sustained persecution against a group, if not stopped, eventually takes from them the physical properties, their livelihoods, their security, and in the end, their dignity as human beings. Once this dignity is destroyed, the family and all social stability is destroyed with it. And while buildings can be quickly rebuilt, the restoring of the dignity to those who have been brutally marginalized and humiliated as human beings is far more difficult journey, a journey for which the hidden costs are far greater than that of any physical reconstruction. And this restoration of dignity requires of international interveners and providers of aid something beyond the mere metrics of dollars spent and project completed. It requires an honest and sincere treatment of affected people with a simple thing, that's respect for them as human beings. As His Holiness Pope Francis said and mentioned several times before the international aid community, people before project. In Iraq, the genocide against Christians and Yazidis and the mass displacement that followed forced tens of thousands of families into homelessness. Within this already most difficult situations, fathers, husbands were made powerless to take care of their families, turned overnight into helpless beggars. The years for most of them have stretched on without opportunity to provide for their families and their sources a meaningful future for their children. And believe me, and I've seen it in the courtyard of the cathedral and around the house where we live, from the 230 tents which were installed for the 700 people in that courtyard, the worst thing you could have is a husband or a father without a job, someone who feels useless, because this will immediately affect the family in a very violent way, and unfortunately, women and mothers should bear all the consequences. Efforts to build business are still stolen from them by their persecutors, who continue to exist in Iraq, but now in a different clothing. As soon as they begin to grow, aid programs which are designed to achieve social, financial, and political objectives designed in the West direct innocent and powerless recipients concerning ways in which they must now change their culture and traditions in order to be helped out of their misery. In other words, as a condition of receiving charity, the persecuted innocents must now allow themselves to be further judged and accepted the fact without protest when they are found wanting. Indignity upon indignity, then where does this lead? In Iraq, as in every other place in this fallen world, it leads to unrest, breakdown of the family, the despair of dependency, and finally, exodus. And it all begins when we allow the seeds of persecution to grow, when we first begin to steal dignity from one another. Whatever hope remains for the Christians and Yazidis and other religious minorities of Iraq. All the reconstructing of the buildings will be for nothing without a greater focus on the rebuilding of dignity. And this, my friends, we all have a very hard work still in front of us. For my people and my broken country, I pray that we will continue to have your support in this longest journey. Thank you and God bless you.
Welcome to the stage the Armenian Director and Diocesan Legate of the Armenian Orthodox Church, Archbishop Akazian.
I want to express my gratitude to Ambassador Brombeck for the opportunity to address this important gathering today. I speak to you in my capacity as a long-time actor in the World Ecumenical Interfaith Relations, who has had the honor of serving as the past president of National Council of Churches and as a present board member to both National Council of Churches and World Council of Churches. For the Armenian Christians, our most vivid experience of persecution came in the early decades of 20th century in the Armenian genocide. That was surely the greatest expression of crude physical persecution, with the entire Armenian population of Ottoman Turkey uprooted from its homeland of centuries, marched into deportations, exile, and annihilation in what would later be termed the first modern genocide. More than 1.5 million Armenians perished and hundreds of thousands scattered across the globe. Armenians shared this fate with other Christian minorities, Greek, Syriac, and other Christians who were systematically targeted for the removal by the Ottoman authorities. But it's important to note that prior to the extreme persecution of genocide, Armenians and other Christians were subjected to laws and regulations in the Ottoman Empire, placing special burdens on them, erecting barriers to daily activities like worship and commerce, and forcing them into a subordinate status before the law whenever they were placed in opposition to Islamic majority. On the eve of 1915, there were 2,650 Armenian churches and monasteries spread out over the breadth of Anatolia. A little over a century later, nearly all of these have been destroyed, either actively or by forced neglect, to the extent that number of Armenian churches left in modern Turkey number only a few dozen. To give you one more example, the Nakhichevan is another small region which belonged to Armenia up to 1930, after which was given to Azerbaijan by Stalin. In that small enclave of Armenia, we had about 5,800 cross stones. Cross stones are carved with the cross and other Christian symbols. There are no other nation that has ever engraved their faith in a stone as the Armenians. In the same place, there are about 22,000 tombstones that were all destroyed, and 89 churches within 30 years from 1990 to 2020. Sadly, what happened in Nakhichevan in the late 20th century is going on right now, 2 decades into the 21st century, in the region known as Nagorno-Karabakh. That region, historically recognized as the ancient Armenian province of Artsakh, but it was placed within the border of Azerbaijan in the 1930s, in one of the many injustices of Soviet period. Karabakh was home to 4,000 cultural and religious sites, churches, fortresses, and monuments, many representing exquisite level of artistry and sophistication. Tragically, the recent brutal war in Karabakh during the fall of 2020 has undone much of this work. Under the peace settlement signed by the Armenia and Azerbaijan, large areas of Karabakh were ceded to the Azeris, who immediately stepped up their efforts to eradicate the material culture of Armenians, Christian Armenia, from the territories now under their control. As a result, the world watched as Armenian inscriptions were sent blasted away, churches and monasteries were bulldozed by the military of Azerbaijan. In an especially sinister political campaign, Azerbaijan, and it must be said, their allies and clients in the West, have launched an aggressive disinformation campaign to cast doubt on the historical presence of Armenians anywhere in the region. That campaign will be all the easier to prosecute with the material evidence of the Armenian presence completely eradicated. It has not come to that yet, thank the Lord. But the safety and integrity of more than 1,000 years of Armenian Christian cultures are hanging by slimest of threads, completely reliant on the protection of peacekeepers from Russia. The challenge before us is first and foremost a challenge of awareness. We need to work through every institution, national governments, ecumenical and interfaith organizations, the churches themselves, the NGOs, and the United Nations to make the plight of Christian communities visible and concrete in the eyes of the world. Our other challenge, of course, is to stand with these faith communities in their time of trial, to speak up on their behalf, and to act in such a way as to preserve their spiritual, material, and human resources. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Please welcome visiting expert, United States Institute of Peace, Knox Thames.
There are two types of laws, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, those that are just and those that are unjust. He continued, a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. He further explained that any law that uplifts the human personality is just, and any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. Were Dr. King alive today, I believe he would draw the same conclusion about laws that limit religious freedom and promote the persecution of individuals because of what they believe. Just laws should defend religious minorities, not persecute. Just laws should facilitate religious practice, not restrict it. Just laws should end discrimination, not enhance or advance it. Just laws must promote equal citizenship, not limit rights based on religion or belief. Today, for this panel, we will discuss legal structures of persecution and religious discrimination. International law is clear that the obligation of governments that they hold is to protect the individual rights that each and every one of us hold. They are to protect the rights of people to pursue truth as their conscience leads. However, we know, and some of you know firsthand, that that is not the reality in too many countries around the world. From our panel, we'll hear about a range of limitations. Some examples that we'll hear about are laws that assault individuals for pursuing truth as their conscience leads in the form of blasphemy or apostasy laws. We'll hear about lawfare that attacks specific communities, criminalizing the basic tenets of their faith, such as Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan or Baha'is in Iran. We'll hear about the out-and-out war against religion perpetrated by the communist Chinese government against all faith, and the less visible but arguably more pernicious registration systems that create incredibly high, burdensome systems that make it impossible for communities to form and thus make their basic worship illegal. We all can agree that the law should defend the vulnerable and not oppress the innocent. So I'm very pleased to introduce this outstanding panel and the conversation we'll have today. First, we'll have Congressman Ro Khanna, a Democratic representative from California's 17th District. We'll have Amjad Khan, spokesman of the U.S. Ahmadiyya Muslim community and professor at UCLA. Bob Fu, the founder and president of China Aid. And John Marsh, chairman of the board for Barnabas Aid. So each of these panelists will share for about 4 minutes to give everyone an opportunity to share their views, and if time permits, we'll then have a discussion. So we'll start with Congressman Khanna. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the honor of having me and for your work in standing up for religious freedom, religious expression in the United States and around the world. The fundamental premise of America is a nation founded on religious freedom, religious expression, a plurality of religions. That's what was critical to the founding of our nation. A view from John Locke and after wars in Europe that we would recognize the plurality of religions and religious expression in our nation. I believe that liberalism must allow for religious expression. So to be truly liberal, you can't just have a view of public reason that excludes people's deep commitments to religious expression. We need to allow for religious expression within the public sphere in the United States. And I believe that the United States needs to stand very, very clearly for religious expression, religious freedom around the world. That means condemning unequivocally actions in Saudi Arabia where you've had the execution of Shiite Muslims, and raising that is a human rights violation. It means condemning very clearly nations that suppress expressions of Christian faith or persecute Christianity. It means condemning very clearly nations that discriminate against any particular religion or a person's deep convictions. We have to recognize that the diversity of religious thoughts and commitments actually makes us stronger. And let me sort of conclude my remarks with the person who I thought understood this the best, which is the great Frederick Douglass in Composite Nation. Frederick Douglass, of course, a person of deep Christian faith, talks about how it would not be wise for any church not to have diversity of religious thoughts, because that actually strengthened his own faith, strengthened his own understanding of his own faith, to see the plurality of diverse faiths thrive in the United States. I think Douglass's central insight is a philosophical one, which is that the religious expression is not just honoring people's dignity, it's not just honoring people's deepest commitments, it's actually helping us get to a better understanding of our own worldviews and of truth by doing that. And that's why the United States must be committed to that here and around the world.
Right. Thank you, sir. I'm John.
Well, thank you. As a lawyer and a law professor, keenly aware of the power of law, for good and for bad. And as a religious freedom advocate, we see that the law has been increasingly used and weaponized to repress communities. And we're talking about legal structures of discrimination. And it's very important to analyze the legal question in order to avoid the worst atrocities later. For me, this is personal because I see it in Pakistan as an Ahmadi Muslim, an issue that I've spent most of my life studying, researching, and advocating about. There are three structures of legal discrimination in this country. It begins with the Constitution. The Constitution of the country defines who is or is not a Muslim for purposes of the law, the only Muslim state to do that. And it declares the entire Ahmadiyya Muslim community to be non-Muslim by the stroke of a pen in 1974. Now that's amazing. We profess to be Muslim, but a country by its constitution says we can't. But that's not the end of it. The second structure of discrimination and what follows from the Constitution is the criminal legal apparatus. And in 1984, 5 blasphemy laws were promulgated, 2 that specifically target Ahmadi activities for posing as a Muslim. What this means is any act, any recitation of Arabic script, if I say salam, if I call a mosque as an Ahmadi, these are arrestable offenses. And 40% of all arrests are of Ahmadis. These blasphemy laws are repugnant to everything that we stand for as a nation, but it's not just the anti-Ahmadi laws. All persecuted communities suffer under these laws. But in Pakistan, it's much worse than that. It gets into the government machinery, discrimination at every level. To vote as an Ahmadi, we must disavow us being Muslim. We must say that the founder of our community is an imposter. We must say under penalty of perjury these things in order to vote. No one in this room would ever do such a thing because it strikes at the core of freedom of conscience. Imagine if every Catholic or Mormon in America would have to say they're not Christian in order to vote. That is the reality for over 1 million Ahmadis with a 99% literacy rate who can't vote in their own country as citizens of their country. They can't get their passports renewed. They have the word Ahmadi stamped on their passport, so they can't go and take the pilgrimage for Hajj. This is the discriminatory apparatus that's the daily reality of an Ahmadi. But now, the last point I wish to mention is recently the telecommunications arm of the country of Pakistan, the equivalent of the FCC, the PTA, has now extended the criminal laws to foreign citizens. 2 US citizens were served a notice a few months ago saying that the official website of the Ahmadi community is posing as Muslims and that US citizens have to pay 500 million rupee fine and be subject to 3 years in jail with no content whatsoever associated with Pakistan. The extraterritorial application of these laws is dangerous. It affects all communities. So I sincerely believe here at the end that the way you deal with bad laws are good lawyers. And the legal movement is what will transform that particular situation. But it must come from those in this hall to understand that this beleaguered community is suffering from these structures. Then and only then can they be dismantled.
And I would add, one of the 2 Ahmadis who was charged is here on the stage. Amjad was been charged. So,
yeah.
Bob.
I think Dr. Martin Luther King would have not thought there is a third set of law, third kinds of law, that it looks like a just law on some of the letters of the law, but in the devils is in the detail, in their practice, especially in public square, in their execution of the law, is all evil. In the instance of the People's Republic of China, if you read the Chinese Constitution, Article 36, citizens of the People's Republic of China shall enjoy freedom of religious belief. Can you believe that? It's still there. But then there is an article down the road, under the Article 36, it said the state even shall protect normal religious activities. Mm-hmm. The word normal, that's the devil. Mm-hmm. And then it said no one shall use religion to engage in activities that disrupt public order. a pastor friend of mine, Pastor Wang Yi from Early Rain Covenant Church, one sermon on the pulpit, just to cite John 3:16 of the New Testament, and Chinese president name said, please repent, you have a time for salvation. 9 years imprisonment. He was accused of subverting of state power. Then the next one is impair the health of citizens. If you are charismatic citizens, Christians, if you pray for the healing, that is called the evil cult. Impair the health of citizens, can sentence you 14, 15 years. And they interfere with the state education system. And today, millions of Chinese children, students, along with your students, teachers, even nurses, doctors, they are totally forbidden to have their faith, and both actually in private and in practice. So this is called the interference of education system. And millions of Chinese religious children were forced to sign a form to renounce their faith in the name of so-called sinicization. Means your faith has to be compatible with communism and socialism. The third one is religious groups. The Constitution said the religious groups and religious affairs should not be subject to control by foreign forces. That's on the Constitution. And according to that, 1 to 3 million predominantly ethnic Uyghurs, Kazakhs, are under the concentration camps because they are deemed as religious extremists, separatists, subverter with the foreign forces. And my good friend, Chinese-American pastor John Hall, was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for what? Setting up 12 or 17 schools for 2,000 children, for the Kachin minority children between China and the Burma border. So in China, we have seen now reach to the lowest, the worst level of legalized religious persecution right now. I think the solution is not only good lawyers. The good lawyers in China already arrested who defend those who are defenseless. That's the Communist Party's merciless thing. But also, really, I honestly think to hold those perpetrators accountable in a real way.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Bob. On behalf of the founder of the Barnabas Organization and its international director, the Core Episcopus, the very Reverend Dr. Patrick Sugdeo, we are very thankful for this opportunity to shed light on this really important topic of the legal structures. As I've said before, Dr. Sugdeo can't be here because of a legal structure, the COVID restrictions. But as chairman of the U.S. division of the Barnabas Organization, I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to present a perspective on this topic in which we've participated for a number of years. It's been said by others that crises provide opportunities that may not have previously existed. And it's really clear in today's world that today's world continues to experience an unprecedented number of crises. So what then are the opportunities that may be resounding from these crises that we face? American pastor Chuck Swindoll, in a recent message, framed it this way: we are all faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as impossible situations. So what then are the impossible situations that we're facing that may be disguising great opportunities? First, there are what appear to be very significant national laws, such as in Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, which prohibit, as we've heard, the free exercise of religion. We characterize these laws as blasphemy laws, laws pertaining to national security, and laws pertaining to the conversion of people from one religion to another. In many cases, such as the case with Asia Bibi, people are intimidated, arrested, jailed for extended period of times, and may ultimately receive punishments solely based on their desire for religious self-expression. These actions caused an Indian Christian organization to say recently, the justice system has failed to defend the rights of persecuted Christians and other minority religions. Another impossible situation is caused by laws which support disinformation and hateful rhetoric, and those often are targeted against religious minorities. Campaigns of this type embolden intimidation, harassment, mob violence against various religious minorities. The recent report of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom said that the worst Hindu-Muslim mob violence in more than 3 decades left 50 people dead and 200 injured in February 2020. Similarly, as we have heard by Bob speak so eloquently, the laws in China restrict religious behaviors and underground church participation. An advanced surveillance state in China subjects people to a social credit system designed to coerce them to comply with behavior that the state deems reasonable and proper. Non-conforming churches are destroyed, and church leaders, as we have heard, are arrested and jailed. The USCIRF reported that China has increased its international pressure on religious freedom and human rights by intensifying the efforts of sinicization of religion in general, and specifically targeting Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist minorities within their country. Another situation is caused by the state-level anti-conversion laws in India, which serve the country's Hindu nationalist perspective and prohibit conversions to religions apart from the state-sponsored religion. About a third of India's 28 states limit or prohibit religious conversion to protect the dominant religion from perceived threats from religious minorities. Again, the USCIRF report. In addition to these infringements of religious freedom in Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, the legislatures and the courts in Western nations have also been creating and enforcing laws which limit the freedom of religious practice. Our position in the Barnabas organization has been to support and protect persecuted people and peoples, but feel free to critique the ideologies that bring those persecutions about. Forums such as this allow us to justly critique those ideologies and behind the legal structures which have fomented many of these crises of religious discrimination and persecution. But we do feel that these same legal structures can also be used to turn the crises around and provide a series of great opportunities for all people. Thank you.
Thank you. In the time we have remaining, I'll ask just a couple of brief questions. First, I want to go to Congressman Ro Khanna. What would be your advice to us? You're an outspoken member of Congress on human rights, both at home and abroad. We've got a room full of advocates here from around the country and around the globe. What advice would you have for us about how we can work with people like you to give you the information you need, the support that you need to be that voice for human rights?
Well, I think you're doing it by showing up, by speaking out, and ultimately I think the advantage you have is you have a truth and human aspiration on your side. I mean, the aspiration to be able to worship a God of one's choosing, one's family's choosing, one's community's choosing is so deep in human nature, and I think comes before any state or government. It's the most sacred relationship a person has. And so when you stand up and say that people should have that freedom, that literally is the basis of the American experiment. And I mean, it goes back to John Locke. And so I think you're on such firm footing philosophically that having those conversations with members and insisting that our foreign policy prioritize those is very important. And you have traces of that across the world. I mean, Gandhi was a huge believer in religious pluralism. So I think you can draw from traditions in many different countries to support religious freedom of expression.
And turning to Amjad and Bob, we've got about 3 minutes left. What are your top 3 best practices for advocacy? What have you seen that works when you're engaging the State Department, members of Congress? What would you share? What are some good thoughts for us?
It's a very good question. I'll just say that, yesterday we saw it on display. When the persecuted advocate for the persecuted. So we are all good, and there's wonderful choruses in this room. People who are advocating for their own causes, and they should. But when you advocate for another community with that same passion, and then you build that coalition, that's the symphony. That sound is beautiful, and that's what we need in the halls of Congress. So I really think it's about coalition building, the people here advocating for each other. That's the best practice, and then concise points and something implementable. Sam Brownback talked about this, that sometimes you can only get 40% of the way. So try to get that 40%. Don't reach for 100% right away, and you'll see some incremental change maybe in 2 or 3 years. Those are 2 points that come to my mind.
Great. Bob?
Yeah, I think, I totally agree on the kind of, maybe we can call it unity, right? Or I borrowed a Communist Party term, but in a good way, called a united front. But it's a good united front. But because in the end, we are fellow human beings. Yes. That's why the summit motto is religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. So it's China Aid, we are a Christian organization. We have never hide our identity, but we help, any religious persecuted faithful. If we got requests and we just help them. We just recently rescued this Kazakh ethnic, Muslim family from Kazakhstan who left the labor camp to Kazakhstan, Turkey, to Midland, Texas. And so another one is really truth-telling. I mean, we should never tell lies or exaggeration for whatever cost. That's my 2 points.
Yeah. John?
I think probably one of the earlier panels had mentioned a thing, and I think Representative Khan said it very well, and that I think we are a civil society, and I think much of what can really be done positively is from the civil sector. It's opportunities like this for us to go from here, where we've been really blessed with the opportunity to see that interreaction of various faiths and to be supported and encouraged by it, and as we go back, to be able to share that in the communities in which we reside, share it with the leaders in those communities, and pray for encouragement and change.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists for their insights and the great discussion we had today.
Thank you. Welcome back, Pam Pryor.
Oh my gosh, what a day. What a day. And this is your last texting opportunity, but it's a great one. That discussion was so good. And when we think back to where we started today with Asia Bibi, it is unthinkable to consider the killing of someone for blasphemy or apostasy. But this practice continues today. So if you would like to be part of the government reform efforts to end the death penalty or to abolish these laws altogether, then sign up to lead, join, or follow this global campaign. Text "free religion" to 844-403-2291, free religion. So I can't see you too well, but anybody in here ever been to camp? Church camp or just camp? Okay, you know how when you get good. So this is kind of like camp for adults. And you know what happens at camp? You get really tired. But this day is about to be over, and we're going to start tomorrow at 8:15. Now, I understand there's going to be an all-night party in Sam Brownback's suite. So if you can find it about 3 in the morning. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Do not do that to dear Sam. He needs his sleep, too. It's been such a joy to be with you today. And I do hope you'll get out tonight. Make sure you exchange those photos of your grandkids and your children. Invite people over after the summit and make sure you're making relationships. It's been such a joy to be with you today, and we'll look forward to being with you tomorrow morning at 8:15. So, good night, and we'll see some of you at dinner and all of you tomorrow morning at 8:15, all right? Bye-bye. Thank you.